here. So wonderful. It's wonderful to have you join us. We have two great presentations lined up for you all. We have Giovanna Massarotto from Penn Law's Center for Technology, Innovation and Competition, and an associate at UCL's Center for Blockchain Technologies. And then we have Andrea Nakash, who's from the University of Sao Paulo and a partner at the Great Unlock. Professor Massarotto, Dr. Massarotto will discuss her research on antitrust remedies and in the context of AI and blockchain technologies. And Dr. Nakash, if I pronounce that correctly, will discuss her work on the connection of justice, algorithmic randomness, and innovation. So it's wonderful to have you both here with us. It's a great way to kick off our series. Before we get started, folks, does anyone have any updates for the group, any news to share? No? All right, well then let's turn it over to Dr. Massarotto.
Okay. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm really thrilled to present a new development in my research stream. So I will share my presentation. Can you see it correctly?
Yes, we can.
Perfect, amazing. So the title of my presentation is Big Tech Flipping the Mindset from Antitrust Threat to Opportunity, because I see antitrust agency putting their effort, energy in the wrong direction. The three takeaways, key points of my presentations are: Big tech, we will see why big tech are considered as an antitrust threat by antitrust agencies, how we can learn from a century, more than a century of US antitrust history on how to handle big tech and antitrust issues in digital markets, and how and why big tech ingenuity, I think, is the key, is the solution to regulate big tech markets. So first of all, okay, let me see why. Okay, first of all, why big tech and antitrust issues? So big tech is the name usually referred to Apple, Amazon, Facebook, and Google. And similar to the situation in 1981 with AT&T, these big tech are considered too big, too powerful, and too pervasive, so out of government control. And antitrust agencies all over the world are opening investigations against big tech. Here in this slide, you see the main antitrust interventions in Europe and in US, which includes not only antitrust investigation against big tech, but also legislative proposal that wants to put multiple obligations on big tech to make digital markets more competitive, so to reduce, in a certain way, to control their power in digital markets. And most of the proposed remedies that are under consideration right now have been employed in the past. So, for example, mandatory interoperability have been adapted to settle entire case in the US, as well non-discrimination. Non-discrimination condition has been employed also in the AT&T 1982 case. Line of business restrictions have been imposed twice on AT&T in the antitrust consent decree in 1956 and in 1982. Structural remedies is famous, the AT&T breakup of 1982. For disgorgement, which is another remedies that it is at stake, I recall as famous case Cephalon, which is a pharmaceutical company that had to pay 1.2 billion in disgorgement to settle the antitrust investigation. And merger presumption, AT&T was prevented in 1913 to acquire competitors to decrease, not increase in size. And from my analysis, what I saw is that mandatory interoperability and non-discrimination conditions seem to be pro-competitive remedies. Line of business restrictions, the result is more uncertain because if we look at the AT&T case, in 1956, AT&T was prevented to enter any unregulated markets, including the market of computers. And in 1969, AT&T at Bell Lab was developed Unix, an operating system, but they couldn't sell Unix due to the antitrust decision. So they decided to license Unix for free, and I think that was a pretty good thing for to bolster innovation, because then Unix was developed a version of Unix to create ARPANET. So in the creation of the first internet network. And but in the second time, so when it was imposed the same remedies, the divested companies in the AT&T breakup, it was imposed a line of business restriction, and in that case, it seems that this remedy had no negative effects on competition because it was unable to anticipate technological changes, such as the cell phone. Structural remedies, you see the red because they didn't pass the test because the AT&T breakup, for example, had for sure pro-competitive effects in the short term, but if we look at the long term, and we look, for example, at the history of Bell Labs, where it was invented, conceived from the transistor to Unix to laser, and have seven Bell Labs researchers have been awarded with the Nobel Prize. That factory of idea, how it is called, so the arm of research of AT&T was significantly reduced after the divestment, because 80% of the turnover of this lab stemmed from the divested companies. So this was a negative effect, I think, for innovation. And also, if we look at the size of AT&T now, it seems larger than before the breakup. And in 12 years, AT&T was again vertically integrated. And with respect to the disgorgement, if we look at Cephalon case, I analyzed the price of the drug that was at stake, and the price seems to have raised about 6 times after the disgorgement. So it didn't seem to me very pro-competitive. With respect to merger presumption, the same regulator recognized that a consolidation in the telecommunication industry was beneficial for consumers. So this is why it became ineffective after a while. In today fast-moving technological markets, I see the exploitation of the big tech ingenuity as the key to regulate these markets, in a sense that I believe that the antitrust agency should exploit AI algorithms to detect the best remedies by going through not only the case that I briefly went through with you, but a century of enforcement action of the US antitrust agencies. And these remedies can be enforced more efficiently through smart contracts and blockchain, as I will better explain later. Because the reason why I truly believe that we should recognize the role of big tech ingenuity and exploit, in particular, AI algorithms, is because the competition is in the creation of new technologies. And it's fundamental that regulators and antitrust agencies do not make the same mistakes that they made in the past, because we have examples of antitrust interventions where the intervention failed to anticipate the development of new technologies. And this should not occur because it's the core of competition to enhance innovation. And so starting from AI system, because AI systems have really a lot of potential, as in any field, also in the context of antitrust. I think that by exploiting supervised and unsupervised learning techniques, for example, we can better detect monopolization conduct. So we can assist antitrust agency in detecting faster, at least, monopolization conduct. And we can also detect, identify the best remedies. And it can also turn out an AI algorithm useful as a tool of antitrust compliance, because AI algorithm build models that can be useful for a company to understand whether its conduct is likely to attract the antitrust scrutiny. And a first proof of concept was developed by Professor Ashina Ito and I, and is described in Gleaning Insight from Antitrust Cases Using Machine Learning, published with Stanford Computational Antitrust. And we built a machine learning system for antitrust agency that was fed through FTC antitrust proceeding under Section 5 of the FTC Act. We used unsupervised learning techniques because we thought more interesting to see what the algorithm was able to learn on its own rather than asking the algorithm to detect specific variables. And we assessed the result from both a technical and an antitrust perspective to show how important is to combine different skill sets in the construction of this AI application. And the technological progress, so moving on to blockchain, the technological progress is also offering technologies that can reduce the market power of big tech without an antitrust intervention, because blockchain was created to bypass markets, but today to bypass banks, but today can bypass any intermediaries, including big tech, because thanks to the consensus mechanism that governs the blockchain network, which is made up by the same blockchain users. So the logic of a blockchain is similar to the logic of a buyer group. So you join a buyer group because you want to benefit from the network effect that you will not have a single individual. So this can reduce, this can be a solution, a more organic solution to tackle the big tech issue in the context of antitrust. And the same blockchain consensus mechanism can be used to define the best antitrust solution to regulate digital markets, because can be used to define this solution through the consensus between the governments and the same big tech and other market players. And another blockchain technology that I find particularly compelling in the context of antitrust is smart contracts, because we can use smart contracts to auto-enforce most of antitrust remedies and make the enforcement action more efficient. Because one of the main concerns related to related to these remedies is related to the cost of monitoring the company's compliance with these remedies. So the cost can be significantly reduced by using smart contracts. So this is why I think a smart contract can turn out to be a remarkable antitrust tool. In conclusion, a blockchain can be used to run, so smart contracts run in a blockchain, and an antitrust blockchain can be used for running smart contracts, and can be used to exploit the consensus mechanism, and in conclusion, to make more efficient, more effective the antitrust enforcement action. So in conclusion, this is why I see big tech ingenuity more as an opportunity rather than a threat. I think the government needs to stay ahead of tech if they really want to provide the solution that digital markets need, and unlocking the potential of AI and blockchain seem to me the natural way and the only solution to regulate in an effective way. So thank you.
All right, great. Thank you so much. So folks, does anyone have any questions? You can, okay, so Nonapa is saying, government must stay ahead of tech, yes, and not react to tech, but stay ahead. That's true. Hold on, right. Yeah, so what's so is this how did that project come about? So this is a project
the machine learning
part, yeah, the machine learning project that came out of the CodeX computational antitrust group. And so what's the next step for the project, let me ask?
The next step is to explore other AI techniques to see if we can detect other useful patterns that can be used, that can facilitate the antitrust enforcement action. That project, the idea of that project stemmed from my book, because I performed a multi-regression analysis to predict Google breakup. And I found, because a multi-regression analysis is a supervised learning method for prediction, I thought, okay, why don't use a more sophisticated version of prediction? And that it was an experiment, and it turned out that yeah, we had useful results, so that was great.
Okay, so can you remind me? So are you predicting a breakup, or what is the prediction?
I used the AT&T breakup, so the coefficient stemmed from the AT&T breakup to assess the Google breakup, because there were many similarities among both platforms. So I thought, okay, it might be nice. And the results were basically that, yeah, the breakup wasn't a remedy that was more pro-competitive than having the company investing in innovation, because there were two decreased in market share in the multi-regression analysis, and one wasn't related to the breakup. So the main conclusion was, okay, the breakup decreased the market share of Google, but it wasn't the first time. So we can decrease the market share of this corporation in a more organic way by incentivizing companies to innovate. So I think we should keep companies incentive to innovate, and this is the best way to increase competition, because they are under pressure.
Yes, absolutely. So so Peter is saying, do you think that unsupervised learning an unsupervised learning system would be able to detect viewpoint discrimination by big tech?
Yeah, it might be, in a sense. really open to new projects. I hope, in a sense, our paper wanted really to pave the way for future AI applications in the field of antitrust. I think there is a lot of potential because, and there is so much that we can learn from past experience, as I emphasized in the presentation. This is why, and I believe that if we want to really tackle this corporation, the only way is to go at the same speed of these corporations. So I don't see really alternatives than not. So I'm very pleased that Thibault started this project, because I truly believe both blockchain and AI are computational tools, and I couldn't be more pleased to see that there is a journal focus on this topic. So
got it. Thibault, who's really launched the effort at CodeX, the computational antitrust effort, he's saying we have several papers ready for the computational antitrust project, and he sent around the URL for that. So please check that out. Fabricio is saying, congrats on the presentation. Could you share some detail about the data set for unsupervised learning models?
Yes, so we use the data from the FTC website. So it's a public database. And we focus on, as mentioned, on Section 5 proceedings. So the Section 5 FTC Act is the main rule of law used by the FTC to enforce antitrust. So we focus on that. Well, let me think. The data set included, we didn't go through so many cases, but it was helpful to start showing some evidence that these algorithms works. So with respect to data, if you're interested in the variables, they are described in the paper. We looked at the industry, at the conduct, the anti-competitive conduct that was under investigation, at the remedies. But at the end, we reduced the number of variables to in our AI systems because some variables were statistically irrelevant, so meaningless for our AI system. So, but it's really described in the paper. So that Thibault,
Great. Bruce is asking, what forecasts of technology can be learned from corporate responses to antitrust settlements / orders?
So, can you please repeat? So what?
Yeah, how can you, I guess, how you can predict technological developments from prior? No, Bruce, you might want to.
It's a great question, Bruce. This is a great question. So the reason why I think is fundamental to have the big tech, but the companies involved in the decision process of what will be the remedies adapt is because these technologies have knowledge that the antitrust agencies have not, because they often have created the same markets where that they are accused to have monopolized. So they for sure know better than antitrust agencies what could be the technological changes that can happen early in the future. Because if you think of what happened at the time of AT&T, AT&T was developing from the voice messaging service to the cell phone, and there was such a delay due to regulation and the antitrust enforcement action. So this is why I think if you involve the companies, they are investing a ton of money on research and development. So you know where they are focusing their attention. So what is the technology more appealing and that have more chances to be developed in the future. So in this way, they can stay ahead of tech, I believe.
Got it. Okay, Thibault is saying 100%. Thank you for such a great paper. Giovanna, can you explain to everyone what happened when using data from the DOJ combined with the FTC?
Yes, okay, we started collecting also data from the DOJ because I thought, okay, the DOJ Antitrust Division is an antitrust agency and it's in the US, so it might be helpful to include also the DOJ. But, you know, the DOJ Antitrust Agency enforce different rules of law and enforce different remedies. So we ended up with many variables and we thought, okay, it was too time consuming and it wasn't worth the effort for our experiment, but we will please to see if other researchers will build an algorithm that include the DOJ. I think it's more challenging. So to see a useful patterns for the reason that I just explained, in a sense, you end up with many more variables. So the possibilities that you have useful results are reduced. So this is why, and this is why I would start honestly from focusing on an agency, and then if you have a useful result, I will try with including other agencies. But yeah, for us was challenging because we didn't see like any useful results from combining the data. And also the coding part is more challenging because you have to code different terms and it's much more easier if you use an agency because the language is more or less the same in all decisions. So this is why I think we can use natural language processing. So many computational tools to detect similarities and to make faster the enforcement action, not to replace antitrust agencies, but to assist antitrust agencies. So.
Okay, so sounds great. Scott is asking how governments might begin to focus on regulating, for example, Stanford MinePy's cryptocurrency blockchain. Are you familiar with that?
No, not with this project in particular, but I'm pleased to know that that there is this project ongoing.
Yeah. I'm also not familiar with it.
That antitrust regulators should be the first to adopt blockchain, also to increase transparency. So you can have a blockchain that enable every consumer to see what the agency is doing and might want to participate. And you can have a level of permission that enable only the agency, to take the final decision. But at the same time, you share the information with everyone. So this, I think, would increase people trust in the same agencies, because right now, if you look at the cryptocurrency regulation, people in the tech industry, in the blockchain industry, are very upset in a sense that they don't feel like that the government is appreciating, recognizing, and understanding the technology in the first place. So I don't think, I think regulation is fundamental to make a technology mainstream, but at the same time, we need to tell the key points of these technologies to enable regulators to understand how to regulate. So this is why I think by using the same technologies is the key, because in this way you have regulators working with the same technologies and understanding, recognizing the potential, because they are using it. As long as you just say, okay, we have to regulate AI, we have to regulate blockchain, but they have not zero knowledge, but a little knowledge of how these technologies works. I think the role of the regulator might be not so good in terms of competition. In a sense, you risk stifle innovation, rather than encouraging and encouraging innovation. So this is one.
Got it. Well, wonderful, Giovanna. Thank you so much for sharing your research with us. We are sort of at the halfway point of our time, so I want to leave some time to Andrea too. But it's really very interesting work you're doing. Really appreciate again you sharing it with us, and if you could give us your contact information so that folks can follow up with you directly, that'd be great. You can just put it in into the chat, and yeah, please keep us posted.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It was wonderful, and I definitely I will keep follow the amazing activities of the center. So it was truly a pleasure, and I'll join other meetings if I can.
Nice to have you. Thank you again. And okay, so let's turn it over to Andrea now. Andrea, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Just cannot open my video, but you can hear me, can't you?
Yes,
now.
we can.
Yes, I can open it now. Hi, hello, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here. Giovanna, I'd love to hear your presentation. Thank you so much. And Roland Vogel, Susan Salkind, thank you again and so much for having me here. It's lovely to be able to debate with you. Thank you. So what I'll present are the results of my research called the Ultima Ratio, First Studies for Theory of Justice as Randomness. I have very special thanks to the CodeX group and to Bruce Cahan for decisive dialogues on this research in 2019 and 2020. The idea of this research is to introduce the concept of randomness into the theoretical discussion of justice. And I'm not talking about a statistical randomness here, the concept from the 17th century, which is understood as equally probable distribution, but I'm speaking about a more recent concept called algorithmic randomness from the 1960s, which is defined as, I would say, lack of structure in language. And this concept was born in the development of the algorithmic information theory, mostly in the brilliant mind of Gregory Chaitin. Here we have Felipe Abrão and Virginia Chaitin present. They work with Greg in the development of this concept until today. I'll say a few words about algorithmic randomness, and then I'll bring you what I think are for very good news that came out of this research. So first of all, I'd like to present algorithmic randomness as a universal treasure.
Andrea,
yes?
It doesn't appear that you're sharing your slides. So if you did want to start your slide deck anytime now.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
I'm so sorry. I forgot to connect that. I'll show you. Well, this is, can you see
there
that
they
now?
are. Thank you so much.
Oh, I'm so sorry. There it goes. So this is the presentation with thanks, and then I'm speaking about algorithmic randomness. Here are Solomonov, Kolmogorov, and Chaitin. You can see Felipe and Virginia and Greg here. And so I'll have for good news after speaking a little bit about how algorithmic randomness is a universal treasure. It is, first of all, it's universal because it is thought of in binary code. And binary code is, as everyone I think today is familiar, is a universal translator. Everything in language, in any languages, can be translated into binary, and it includes images and sounds and texts. So if I'm speaking about binary code, what is random code? Well, random code is the code that has no rule behind it. We cannot compress it in any relevant way. We don't have any redundancies, relevant redundancies left to make it shorter. So it's not determined by any rules. And if this code is not determined by any rules, we can know, oh, just a second. I'm not being, now I cannot change my slide. Let's see what's happening. I'm having a little technical problem. Can you hear me? Oh, I think it moved. Well,
Yeah, we can hear you fine.
Okay, so I think
yeah.
I'm just pressing the button and now we'll have slides changed because something went different here. But well, random code is necessarily made by a human being. And because if we think about it, it's never, computers don't produce random code. They can only produce things that come out of rules. So it is made by a human being and it could be different. And in our philosophy, in our contemporary philosophy, and that's developed on the thesis, we can say, therefore, that it's necessarily intentional. So considering what random code is, we first step that I hope you can take with me is to think about a totality of it. Let's think about what would be the totality of all possible random code. We could get to that just by tossing a coin and marking zeros and ones for heads and tails infinitely. And we could virtually think of the totality of all possible sequences of zeros and ones. And if we think about it for a little while, we'll see that in that totality of all code that's randomly produced, we have all possibilities for all languages, all structure possibilities for all languages. If you take away the redundancies, you get the random code, but you would have there all the code, all the systems, all the structures that can be thought of in the past, that have ever been thought of in any languages, that can be thought of now, and that can be ever created. So we could say that randomness, algorithmic randomness, knows it all. Everything is already there. Every possible system is already there in this totality. So, and we can think about this in this way. When there's conflict, and this is very theoretical, I know, but it comes to practical developments. When there's conflict, and this is logical, we cannot deny the possibility of conciliatory alternatives, all things considered. If we understand that there is this randomness of structure behind language, and that language can always be different, that everything can be reinvented, then we cannot deny the possibility of conciliation for conflicts. And that's a logical possibility before being an actual possibility. But if you have logical possibilities in mind, you can develop them until they become real and actual. So this gives us the principle of justice. Let me see, for me to read it. We must recognize that we can always rethink, reinterpret, and reformulate any arrangements to our conciliatory novelty. So whenever you find losers, you have the opportunity of building a system in which they can perform better. This is a guideline for innovation as a means of justice. Now, we're very used to think of innovation as a means of profit, of efficiency, of maybe static satisfaction. But here we can think about innovation with this, in my opinion, a higher goal of promoting justice. And it presupposes absolute freedom of thought, because maximizing randomness, using the possibilities in language, using the possibilities of science creation, solution creation, model creation, systems creation is a very important use of freedom of thought. So introducing randomness into the theoretical discussion of justice, is it a novelty? I would like to answer to that question with a yes and with a no. No, because randomness has always been the framework of equal treatment, either for formal or substantive justice. Formal justice, that was assumed by John Rawls, for instance, when he says a society's basic structure should be the same as the one used in gambling. But on substantive justice, we see that when we fight disparities of treatment, we can think easily that randomness is justice in distribution. But then we are thinking about statistical randomness, and statistical randomness imposes us a problem. That is, we're speaking about randomness of what and for whom. There are things that come before, there are decisions that are previous to the distribution that remain arbitrary in that structure. And that happens because we are necessarily dealing in statistics with restricted universes. We have to define what we are talking about, so we need logical identity, and everybody needs to agree on the meaning of what and the meaning and the value of what is being distributed. So we need semantic stability, and therefore you always have someone setting the rules before the distribution. And other than that, when you think about restricted universes, you're using a mindset of scarcity. So that's why I think nobody ever puts randomness in the center of theoretical discussion of justice, because it has limits and it is discussed for particular contexts. But what I'm proposing here is that we change the focus from distribution to the constitution and try to open those universes as people who are discussing epistemic justice have been proposing. So it's in the same line as epistemic justice. We open those universes and we start to admit changes in language, changes in meaning, changes in value, and we put those values and the language and everything that should be established for a distribution is now open to discussion, and you have no longer hidden rulers. And since you can create new conceptions and create new worlds and create new possibilities and even change the science of the way you conceive the world, then you can work with a mindset of abundance. And that you can do when you can think of algorithmic randomness. And that requires us some level of deconstruction of language. So here are the 4 good news based on that. They may be a little disturbing to a few, but the first of all is a time saver, I think, is just that we can understand from the beginning that all meaningful code is structurally biased. So we can let machines learn, but not teach, rule, or judge. That's how we prevent negative feedback loops. The second time saver, I think, is to understand that 200-year-old principles do not do the job, won't do the job regulating AI and social networks. So as much as we all love equity and transparency and accountability, that is hard to translate into code. And equilibrium is hard to translate into code, because when you put equilibrium in some aspect of the code, you lose it in another, and that's the statistical problem. You're always having to choose the classes and the categories that you're working with. But other than doing that, we can measure and compare the amount of freedom allowed to us by algorithms. And I'll show you some experiences on that I did together with Felipe Abrão, who's present today. And the third time saver that I propose is that we are probably approaching a very good model of individual and collective responsibility. On AI and networks, there is no such thing as a mass of indistinguishable authors, as some experts say. We can identify the origin of every piece of data. So as the same way you can say, follow the money to follow the responsibles for something, you can say, follow the random code. When you have this concept of a random code, you can follow it and you always find human beings behind the work of machines. And the fourth good news is that with this concept, I think we can beat skepticism about justice. So measuring freedom in code, we can do that. And this is a choice robustness analysis proposed by Felipe. We are just trying a few formulas together. And here he's measuring, the K is Kolmogorov-Chaitin complexity. He's taking averages of criterions that different systems may use and how complex those criterions are. And he divides that by the choices that are given to the users and see how the systems preserve the choices of the users. So it's a way of measuring freedom there, how our choices are preserved in systems. And then the other way is to measure how much complexity you can add to a system by interfering in it. So he called it user perturbation analysis. You can compare like libraries, they're selling books and one is open, the other is closed, open to transformation, open to inputs. So you obviously will have, and he kind of translated it to present value as he calculates limits. He's showing us that you will have a much more complexity, and when you allow people to work on the system too and contribute, and so the more freedom you have, you maximize possibilities, you maximize algorithmic complexity. So I'm thinking logical possibilities are a value. We have to have the more we have of that, it's the better. When we maximize possibilities, we are maximizing freedom, and you can do that in algorithms. And for that, we are using a idea of human being that is always, human beings remain irreducible to any predicates in any language there. Human beings are just the ones who are making choices in systems. They're never, ultimately, they're never classified. So against skepticism, I could say that John Rawls' theory of justice is not sufficiently comprehensive, and that's Amartya Sen who taught us. But his response to it is assumedly incomplete and also undetermined in many aspects. This gives room for skepticism on justice, and just I'm saying in this field, but there are other fields of discussion of that. And the concept of randomness can help us work on a renewed and tech-compatible theory of justice. So this is the main idea. We could come to, instead of a static model as Rawls or incremental model as Amartya Sen's, a transformational model based on the possibility of change, to rethink, to reinterpret, to reformulate arrangements in any systems that exist. I will just show a few developments. When you think about language construction and code ordering, the more you have it, the more you're to the right of this table, and the more, and as you deconstruct language, you go to the left of this table. So we have problems there of incommensurability and epistemic asymmetry when you have more constructed language. And then you get to undecidability and even unknowability, as Gregory Chaitin says, when you go down to deconstructing language. I'm giving those references because they may be interesting to a few of you, maybe. And here there are the functions of justice, so corrective, commutative, distributive, allocative, epistemic, and comprehensive in a logic of deconstruction of language. And I have one more that is showing that we have freedom as no interference when you have a well-built world. And in this well-built world, this strongly conceived world, you would have the goods that you protect would be very well determined, like privacy, property, inviolability of the body. And the problem you have, the injustice you have, would be inequality. We are now very used to a new level of discussion, which is more established in language than in strong conceptions of the world, in which we have freedom as participation, and the goods are data. Data are goods, are the esteemed goods. We are protecting data. And the problem we have, the injustice we have, is disparity in data. So it's a new level of knowledge. And what I'm proposing here is that we take a look at an even deeper level of knowledge, in which we need to protect not exactly data, because the value of data depends on epistemic contexts, but more than that, I'm not leaving behind the protection of data, but in a deeper level, to protect logical possibilities, so that people don't lose possibilities as they use social networks, as they use technology, AI. So the esteemed good will be logical possibilities, and the injustice there is domination, is someone taking out possibilities from someone else through a system. And the concept of freedom is Philip Petty's concept of non-domination. So here is what I had. This research had also a discussion of informal language and of corruption of systems. And I just would like to leave you a few final words, and I hope they are provocative. I would say that justice is patternless, and it can be clear in our world now. And injustice is in the patterns. So this is it. Thank you very much. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Andrea. Wonderful. So this is, quite theoretical work.
Yes.
I always have the easiest time to understand complex theoretical concepts if they're put into sort of, in the form of examples. So I'm wondering where you think that the insights and those takeaways, will find application, perhaps at some point, in the world of justice.
Okay, thank you so much for that question, Roland. I'll try to touch a field that is not my field of. I'm not an expert in that. Giovanna is, but I'll try to touch that field. Saying, suppose we are discussing the technology that existed in the 90s, and in which we had computers. Like Microsoft computers or so, that we cannot use other systems. So you were, you could only, even if the company did not do anything against competition, we could only use that system. We would like to, I would like to think of that as how a company, for instance, offers possibilities to people. So at first, when you develop a technology that is connected and has interoperability, if I'm not mistaken with the term that is used, when they first offer the technology, they are increasing the possibilities for people, and that's great. You're still in a positive direction there. By the time people are connected in a way that they can no longer not use the technology, and you have like a very small company, for instance, here in São Paulo, and someone has to pay for royalties for the software, and nobody else can develop the same kind of software, and not because the company is doing something against competition. They may not be doing anything, and the law may protect all the practices that are there are legal. But when people have no longer the possibility of change, and they have to be using that software, then you have something that is unfair, but not illegal. So what I would use, this theory could be used, for instance, to make us careful of those movements in which you can dominate people even without breaking any rules, without doing anything illegal, for instance. We would have a criterion. I saw discussions on what happened with Cambridge Analytica. I don't know, can I speak this freely there? Because it's the only way I can express myself. But
Sure.
I'm thinking about Cambridge Analytica. I saw people saying, I'm not sure if we did something wrong, something against democracy there. And people from Cambridge Analytica. And I would say, if you're preventing people from knowing things, and you are taking them in a particular direction and disqualifying another possibility, I like this theory for that, because it works. Like you are diminishing people's possibilities because they're not seeing alternatives. So if they're not seeing the alternatives and not giving a competent perception of another possibility, you are diminishing possibilities. You can always increase people's possibilities. You cannot decrease them. And that would be domination in Philip Petty's sense. I have kind of changed a little bit because he is a political philosopher and I'm working with language. I changed it a little bit, but the idea of freedom as non-domination is there. So we would have a rule of thumb, kind of a very simple rule to think of whether what we are doing is fair or not, even if we don't know the situation, the practical situation in advance. And this is very important because we are moving towards a world in which we cannot measure the consequences of what we're doing, the factual consequences as easily as before. It was never very easy to measure consequences of actions, but in our world, in the scale that we have with technology, it's super important. So you can just close your eyes and think, am I reducing people's possibilities? Yes or no? And at some point, if people are losing possibilities because of your actions, you're being unfair, even if you're acting legally. That would be one way.
Very interesting. So great. So folks, I'm just trying to catch up with the chat. So
yes.
Peter's saying fascinating. David's saying this is so good. Definitely makes sense, especially the idea of retaining possibilities. Hold on.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you for the thought-provoking talks. I agree with the last idea that injustice has patterns. Between justice and injustice, it's the latter. The latter is what has patterns, and it's what we can track. And yeah, so I think that's one. I think that's an interesting takeaway from the talk. I think Bruce has his hand up too.
Yeah, as always, Andrea and Felipe, I'm a huge fan, and I think this is important work. And to anticipate and maybe answer Roland's question, as everybody knows, I do a lot with space and how we're going to transact in space. And so what's really important for me in Andrea's work is that we can't necessarily use industrial age patterns of behavior and the laws intended to constrain them to dictate how the space economy and the actors and the governments in the space economy should or can or will act. So the freedom of thought in this randomness discussion, the freedom of thought in not using the language of an industrial age to layer the way we think about actors or outcomes or intersections in the space age is really cleansing and probably appropriate. And so what I take away often from the discussions with Andrea is that aside from the freedom of possibilities, this allows a more nuanced form of justice in knowing that there are probably possibilities that for judges and courts with fact patterns that haven't presented themselves for litigants that haven't arisen yet. Think about the robots suing. And so it's really helpful to be, it's almost like having a weight pulled off your shoulders to have this theoretical validation that Andrea and Felipe have been leading, with Gregory and the rest, to say we have to move beyond a mental construct where everything was in code of the case law discussions and you're projecting what would happen to a set of similar or dissimilar facts, because it won't work after a while, as we're seeing with AI, as we're seeing with bioethics, etc. So I find it really, really helpful for us in legal tech to not just be thinking in lockstep with the past, but to free our minds and therefore our software to go beyond it. So thanks, Andrea.
Thank you so much, Bruce. Oh, I lost I lost sound.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
So on that note, we are pretty much at the end of our time, actually a little bit over. So let me thank you, Andrea, for your wonderful talk and for sharing with us. And please keep us posted on your research. And then if folks wanted to reach out to you directly to connect with you, how could they reach you?
Yes, please. I'll write my email here. Please write to me. I would love to keep on with the conversation. Thank you so much.
Yes,
Thank you.
yeah.
Thank my friends,
Please.
Felipe, Virginia, Bruce. Thank you, Roland, so much, and
Yeah.
Susan.
It was great to see you. And Giovanna, also thank you. And thank you for your presentation. And folks, we'll meet again. I don't know, Susan, when is our next meeting?
Next Thursday, September 2nd. So it's September already.
Oh,
We'll
yeah.
see
Oh my
everybody
God.
back.
Where did the summer go? So, okay. So look forward to seeing you next Thursday. All right. So tune in again next week. Thank you all, and take care. Bye-bye.
Hi, Andrea. Do you want to put your email in the chat?